Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who, when lost in the infinite mysteries of the sacred and the profane, know that sometimes it's just best to take Aleph. Right now, we are reading every short story in Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird Anthology, including this one, Jorge Luis Borges' The Aleph. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in writer stories. We've seen a couple of these, M.R. James' Casting the Runes and Hugh Walpole's The Tarn, stories where, they say write what you know, and these are writers writing about how much they hate other writers. I love it.
I'm Bob. I'm interested very much in this story, especially, it's just a mind-blowing story when you finally get to the final Aleph, the Aleph, when you see it. But I think also all of the bits leading up to it are all about an individual's relationship with eternity and with the universe, and how that either makes you feel big or how it makes you feel lost and forgotten.
So what do we know about Borges? We just read a different short story of his, The Immortal, which was awesome. Viewers, feel free to go check out that video if you have also read the story. And this one, I feel like, is serving up a hot platter of more or less the same. We have literary references. We have mind-bending puzzles and warpings of reality. And we have a kind of perspective of the world which treats literature and culture as like the filter through which our narrator is seeing everything.
Yeah, and this one is, we have the literary references, and if this is your first time reading the story, you kind of come to the literary references, you're like, why do I care about these poets who feud? But it's very much worth it. And when you go back and read it, you start to think about why literature is so important. In The Immortal, we found that literature is very interesting because if you are so old, if you live, eternally, you are immortal, you might end up being Homer. You might just happen to write the Odyssey. You might happen to write it a second time. Literature is one way that we do get immortality, especially if you're writing, your work will outlast you. This, however, I think we have Borges, as a character again. He's a character in this story, and it seems like his love or his obsession, this woman dies, and now he's trying not to forget her. And I think this is where we come up against our first universality or exposure to the eternal or to everything, because he's looking through so many photographs of her. Before in The Immortal, we're trying to become a great general so people will remember us. Then we try to live forever so people will remember us. We write so people will remember us. In this, he's lost her and he's looking through photographs. And he has this kind of spread of, photograph from her from 15 years ago, photograph of her from 10 years ago, photograph of her from 5 years ago. When you lose someone, when someone dies and you don't want them to die, you still have access to them through these photographs through time. And in that way, it's almost like its own Aleph, its own Aleph, because you can see them represented all at once, 50 different years represented on one coffee table.
I like that her name was Beatrice. Or Beatrice, I guess, with a Z, but, Dante, his muse was also named, well, I guess we would say Beatrice, but Beatrice is what it looks like. In Dante, at least, what you have is a lost lover who has died and is now being elevated to a kind of cosmic principle of goodness. And I think in Borges, what he's doing, I feel like this is a reference that is meant to be registered by the reader. We are meant to know that anytime you have, a woman who is possibly a lover who has died, or maybe almost a lover who has died and who is seen as good, it is meant to be an echo of Beatrice from Dante. But Borges doesn't quite do that. He gives us the echo, but he doesn't push on it. He doesn't rewrite Dante. He doesn't do a second act of Dante. And I appreciate him for that.
And he twists it again. Sorry to do the Andy Samberg twist, but he twists it because we have Beatrice or Beatrice. I guess it's appropriate when it's in Italian, so a little twist.
Yeah.
Because the other character who seems to maybe maybe this is a stretch, but maybe a stand-in for Dante. So we have Borges, we have Beatrice, and we have Carlos Argentino Daneri, Dante. I wonder if Dante is going through this journey to find Beatrice, and if that's his guide, that's his guiding light to get into heaven, this is interesting where Denary is also trying to be immortal, also trying to encompass a universe through his poetry. He's the possessor, I guess you could say. The Aleph just shows up in his house. And the way it's described is a point in space that holds all other points. He is using this thing to look into it and then to write a poem that he calls the Earth. And while he describes like full cities at a time, many stanzas. And I think the first one is, what does he say, 15,000 lines or something? It's just absurd how much he's writing, because he's documenting like all of the birds at the park and then all of the people who are outside of the gasworks. He's trying to put every detail through the whole world, and he's able to do that because he looks through this Aleph and he writes it. But he's also the laughing stock of Borges. He's kind of a parody because Borges doesn't really take him seriously. He doubts everything that he's doing. And through his journey, when we see Dante do the journey, we're rooting for Dante. But here, we're not really rooting for Denary. We think he's kind of a fool.
Yeah, we're definitely rooting for the character of Borges much more than we're rooting for Denary. I think part of what makes Denary so foolish is the audacity of his project. I mean, he's really trying to write a poem that can describe and encompass the entire globe. And yet when we're treated, I guess we would say treated to pieces of this poem, they really sum it up nicely in that, like, you read it and you're somewhat underwhelmed, but then the poet gives you paragraphs and paragraphs of like literary criticism of their own work. Mm-hmm. He's analyzing his own work in these glowing, effusive terms. And Borges, the character himself, says, I don't know if I would actually have found anything of value in this if not for this person trying to basically convince me at how important the work was.
And I think that's why he seems a fool who is after his own immortality. You and I just finished all of these books about immortality, and we started to think, okay, when you are pursuing that so much, it starts to look a little, not just weird, but you start to become a fool because you're repeating yourself. He is seeking after immortality, and the way he's doing it through his literature is by cramming in, not just portraying the entire world, but he also crams in so many references. That's the first thing that he tells us. After Borges tells us, oh my God, he told me about all of the references that he puts in 3 lines, and he describes it for like a whole half a page. And the final part is, he says, to include within the space of 4 lines 3 erudite allusions spanning 30 centuries of dense literature. First, the Odyssey. Second, the Works and Days. And third, the immortal bagatelle that regales us with the diversions of Savoyard's plume. So he has, now he's depicting the whole world, but he's also trying to cram all of history, how many centuries? 30 centuries into 3 allusions in a couple of lines in his poem. I think that's an interesting element of booms, the whole universe packed into one thing again.
And yet, we talk about the silliness of the whole universe packed into one thing, into this poem, and yet we are presented with the Aleph, the mysterious object. Would we call it an object? Would we call it a space? Would we call it a singularity? I don't know. This thing in the poet's basement, which contains all points in the universe. So when you stare into it, you are taken on this Terrence Malick-esque, quick cut shot through all of human history and all of space and all of time. So in one sense, we're being asked to consider the poet's project as ridiculous. And yet when we see the actual object itself, which to me reads almost as a realization of what the poet is trying to do. It's the muse which seems to have inspired the poet all this time, the ideal in which he was striving for. All points of space and time, he's trying to represent in his poetry are here. And it seems to be quite powerful, quite creatively powerful.
This is my favorite, everyone's favorite part of this story. I read this at Savi's Island. I think I probably had a beer or two, on the beach reading this. And then I just remember going, whoa, and my brain just going like this. It's great. Now, he says, I come to the ineffable center of my tale. It is here that a writer's hopelessness begins. Every language is an alphabet of symbols, the employment of which assumes a past shared by its interlocutors. And he says, basically, okay, I'm going to try and describe this through time because I must, because I'm speaking and thinking. To do that, I'm going to have to give you one sentence at a time and describe it. But that is not how I experience at all. It's just a boom, an explosion of seeing everything at once. And when he goes through this long, almost list poem of all of these beautiful things that he sees, he's telling us, look, I failed you because I saw everything at once, and I just can't describe that to you. Everything everywhere all at once is what he saw. But I think it's a very interesting idea, and to use, and I think this is where it gets weird. I guess obviously that's where it gets weird, but I think this is where it becomes weird fiction. The idea of the Aleph or the Aleph, which I can obviously not pronounce, is this, it's the first letter in Hebrew. It's very important. The way it was described by a historical text, this one guy says, okay, I've got to teach my son how to learn. You need to earn a living for your family. I'll pay you to teach my son. And so he describes the Aleph, which is the first letter. And he says, okay, the letter is a dot above, a dot below, and a diagonal suspended in between. The dot above is God, which, or the universe, which is so big, it's also nothing. So it's just a dot. The dot below is just any person who's trying to look up at the infinite or look up at the universe. And then the diagonal between is the thing that connects them between. Now, that is very beautiful. That is an entire theory in a religion, a whole belief system in a religion. But then I wonder if it's getting weird here too, because it's getting kind of messed with in this story, because we doubt if this is even a true Aleph. Right? He in the at the footnote, he says, I started to think this actually wasn't even real. This is just an imitation of this thing. And this is where it gets weird, because we're connected to something which seems to give us a full view of everything, but how on earth could we possibly view everything at once? And this might just be an imitation Aleph.
And that's what's, I think, good about Borges' stories, is that he never quite tells it to you straight. He'll give you something, but he'll always kind of withhold it slightly. He'll be like, this is what I saw, but is it the real thing? I don't know. I can point to all these other things which might have been more real, which might be a better example of what I'm trying to talk about. Bob, I do want to talk to you about the explicit connections that Borges is making with Aleph to like the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and things like that, because ever since we started reading this weird fiction anthology, we've learned that many of these authors were involved in the Golden Dawn or the Theosophists or any number of other occult societies. So since we started reading this, I have started doing, I've started doing my homework, because what I wanted more than anything was to really pinpoint exactly how people are taking influence from these occult systems. And what I found in this one was Borges ties the Aleph to what is called the Ein Sof, the limitless nothingness that is supposed to represent God. And yet, what I've learned in the Golden Dawn system is that Aleph is actually the first path on the Tree of Life that people take from the top. Now, this is maybe more of a question for readers. If you are a Kabbalah expert, can you explain what Borges is doing here and how it all fits in? Because ever since we started reading this weird anthology, I really want to put some puzzle pieces together. But Google could not solve this mystery for me.
I would love to know too. I suspect though, Zach, it is that letter, because the letter is supposed to be a true divine thing. And I think the interesting thing is that line between, it's the faith. But if it's maybe not a real Aleph, it's maybe not a real Aleph, it could be nefarious if it's trying to trick people, if it's an imitation one. And I think this is an interesting thing that Borges does too, when there's so many historical bits, because he says, well, there was an infinite mirror that Alexander the Great had where you could see the universe. There's something that was found in a tower in 1001 Nights where you can see the entire universe. There's all of these little copies, but I would love to know too, like, what is the relationship between that link, that faith, and then also a link with something else that may not be, or there might be, a fantastical object. How does that relate to weird? Seeing these things and these fantastical objects.
Bob, I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on this, because, you've talked about different aspects of this which are weird, or maybe not weird with a capital W. Maybe some are just strange. Maybe some are just ambiguous, but this is found. We are reading this within the context of a weird fiction anthology. And I am curious how well you think this fits in with all of the stories that we've read before it. Do you feel like it's a comfortable fit? Do you feel like it sticks out a little bit? What do you think?
Well, again, I don't want to say anything that's going to be offensive. I really apologize if I explain this wrong, because my grasp of it is very limited. But I still think this idea of a connection between you and the ineffable, or you and the universe, is very much part of weird fiction, especially when we look at Algernon Blackwood. And when you're looking at the ineffable, when you're looking at the nth dimension, when you're looking at the astral dimension, whatever is there, whether it's terrifying, whether it's friendly, whether it's malevolent, it's awesome. It's sublime. You can't understand it, and it might be too big for you. It might be a threat to you. But I think that heightening that relationship, or emphasizing that relationship between you and some kind of giant thing. If it's Lovecraft, of course, it's malevolent. If it's other authors, it's maybe ambiguous. But I think that is very much a part of weird.
I think you might be right. When this moment happened, it actually reminded me of something which was completely different, but somehow feeling kind of the same. The ending of the Alex Garland film Annihilation, not the Jeff VanderMeer book, the Alex Garland film, which is very, very different. The descent into, I guess you could say, the basement of the lighthouse, where she meets this kind of glowing orb. I guess that's all we can say. It's a glowing orb. It's an object which makes no sense, and your gaze kind of gets lost in it. And it's this descent underground to find a piece of knowledge, but the knowledge doesn't fit comfortably within any kind of human knowledge. Like in the movie, the object transforms into a copy of her. We don't learn anything. We're just even more confused. We're just, it's new. It's the answer that solves everything, but ultimately solves absolutely nothing. Think Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. It's 42. The answer to everything is 42. Well, what's the question? And this right here does a very similar thing, I think, in that we go down, we see the thing, but what do we do with the thing? How does it fit in? How does it solve everything? How does it answer everything? It's not entirely clear, and yet it feels monumental. It feels like it should be the key.
I wonder, too, at the end, when Borges decides, I'm going to tell him he's crazy. He comes back up and his friend, he says, did you see it? Did you see it? Did you see the Aleph? Did you see everything at once? And he says, you should really move out of this house, let them demolish it, and move into the countryside. That is the only cure. And the guy's like, what do you mean? Did you see it? He just pats him on the shoulder and then leaves. He says, I finally got my revenge. I'm wondering, why does he need revenge? Is this truly a false thing that's giving him false images? Is it not the real Aleph? And it makes me think of the Palantir, Saruman's Palantir. You might get glimpses of something that you think will happen, but then, oh no, what is that king's name? Theamir? When he's looking into the Palantir and he thinks all is...
Yeah.
He's Theamir. But, well, please correct me, everyone. I don't have the power of Google because my phone is too hot and it's going to melt right now. So when he looks into the Palantir, he sees that all hope is lost and he becomes so depressed. He lights him. He joins his son to be on fire. Anyway. Looking into the Palantir corrupts him. I wonder, why does he decide that looking into the Aleph is totally false, and so false he's going to take it as revenge? Or is Borges in this story the bad guy?
That's a good question to ponder. And I think that it is something that maybe we should carry with us in the future, especially when it's not entirely obvious. Is the protagonist who's telling us everything that we're currently reading actually the bad guy of the story? And you know what? I wonder how many stories would get a much more interesting reading if we allow that question to really have the time that it needs to answer. So let's keep this in our back pockets. And I want to read more Borges. I want to do it. I want to read more Borges. Talk to you later, Bob.
Borges o'clock, Zach. I was completely wrong. It's Denethor. It's not Theoden. Please don't slam me. I was completely wrong. Denethor is using the Palantir. I'll see you in the Palantir, Zach.